Robert Henderson had lived his entire life in this quiet farming town, where everyone knew their neighbors and nothing ever happened. But lately, something had changed. Strange sounds echoed from the woods at night. Unexplained lights flickered in the darkness, appearing and vanishing without warning. Robert wasn't the only one who noticed. Whispered conversations at the general store revealed that others were experiencing the same unsettling phenomena. The town that had always felt safe and predictable suddenly felt different, charged with an energy that made people lock their doors earlier and glance nervously at the sky. What none of them realized was that their quiet little town was about to become the center of one of the most baffling mysteries in American history. On Friday, August 8th, Robert called the town office at 7:13 p.m. to report something strange he saw in the sky. A weird, completely black, terrifying hole in the middle of the sky above the town. Nothing was coming out of it, and nothing was going into it, as if it were a crack in the sky itself, unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. But because the report was so strange, the office worker didn't believe Robert at all. He thought the caller was drunk or playing a joke. "Sir, I need you to listen to me," Robert pleaded into the phone. "There's something terrible in the sky above our town. It's like a black hole, but it's just hanging there." The office worker sighed. "Look, if you're having some kind of emergency, I can help you, but I can't waste time on prank calls." Dozens of disaster calls started coming in. Only a few minutes passed before dozens of calls began flooding the office worker from other Millfield residents, all reporting the same strange thing that Robert had described, that large, dark, terrifying black opening in the town sky. As more reports came in, the worker began to realize that Robert's call wasn't from a drunk person. It became clear that some kind of disaster was happening, but he didn't know how to respond or help them. When the news spread among the office staff, they went outside to see for themselves. Indeed, when they stepped outside, they saw the strange opening in the sky with their own eyes and confirmed that the problem was far beyond what they could handle. After all, they were just a small office in a small town with about 700 people. At this point, they decided to contact the neighboring town of Brookton. Brookton was bigger than Millfield and had its own police force. They started calling them, describing the reports they had received and how they had personally seen it themselves, confirming that the strange sight was really in the sky. However, the problem was that Brookton's town officials and police weren't convinced by what they were being told. The distance between Millfield and Brookton wasn't very far, and when they looked at the sky from their location, they didn't see anything above Millfield. As the reports continued and Millfield's officials kept insisting on their story, the Brookton police began to take the matter seriously. They decided to send one of their patrol officers to see what this strange talk was all about. That officer was David Sullivan. The very next morning at exactly 7:54 a.m., David left the Brookton police station and drove toward the only road connecting Millfield to the neighboring towns. It was a road everyone in Brookton knew well, and they had driven on it many times before. But what happened that day was extremely strange. David drove for a long time and began to feel that the trip was taking much longer than it should. Every time he looked around to see if he had arrived, he found himself still on the highway until suddenly he found himself back in Brookton again. How did that happen? He didn't know. The road from Brookton to Millfield was a straight road with no side roads, curves, or other paths. It made no sense for anyone to get lost on such a road, even if they didn't know it well. David blamed himself for not paying attention, got back on the road, and started the journey again. But time passed, and he ended up back in Brookton for a third time. At that point, David was convinced something was wrong. David returned to the police station and immediately reported what had happened to him. Based on his strange report, A group of 7 police cars left at 9:15 a.m., heading from Brookton to Millfield. But after they got on the road, the same thing happened to all 7 cars that had happened to David when he was alone. All 7 cars found themselves back in Brookton again. While this was happening, the calls from the troubled town didn't stop. In fact, they became stranger with each caller. All the calls were reporting that the strange black opening in the sky was getting much larger and much darker than before. But since the police couldn't reach the town in any way, there was nothing they could do except tell people to stay in their homes and not go outside until the police could figure out how to deal with this disaster. Of course, they didn't tell the residents that they couldn't even reach the town, so as not to make them more afraid. The police officers gathered and studied maps to see if there was any other road to Millfield they could take, but unfortunately, there was only this one road. In other words, the only road leading to Millfield was no longer leading there. Later that same day, at 8:17 p.m., Brookton police received a call from a woman living in Millfield named Margaret Wilson. She reported that her neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, and their children Thomas and Sarah, were missing and couldn't be found anywhere in the entire town. The Cooper family, according to Margaret, had been very scared by what they saw in the sky and tried to escape the town completely in their car. But after they left their house and started driving, no one saw their car again, and no one saw them leaving the town. "Officer, you have to help us." Margaret's voice trembled through the phone. The Cooper family just vanished. They were so scared of that thing in the sky, they tried to drive out of town, but they never made it past the town limits. Brookton police then tried to confirm if anyone had actually come from Millfield, but when they watched the roads and asked all the residents of their own town, it became clear that not a single resident of Brookton had seen a car matching the Cooper family's car or anything similar to it. The night passed, and August 10th arrived. At 7:30 a.m., calls once again poured into Brookton police, but this time people were complaining that Millfield was covered in complete darkness. When the police replied, "It's 7:30 a.m., which means it should be daylight," the caller's response was that the sun hadn't risen since it set the night before. At that point, the police officers decided they absolutely had to reach these people by any means necessary. They requested a helicopter which flew toward Millfield, hoping that they could see better from the air. The helicopter did move toward Millfield, but unfortunately, it couldn't reach it. Or rather, it reached the location where the town was supposed to be, but they saw nothing from the air. All they found at the town's location was an empty field. This situation continued until noon on August 11th, and then something happened that made the whole situation take an even stranger turn. A Millfield resident named Helen Elizabeth Carter called Brookton police and reported that her daughter Linda was talking to her father from behind their locked apartment door. Her father, who was standing outside in the complete darkness that had covered the town for nearly 2 days. When the police asked her what was so strange about that, and why her father had even left the house under these conditions when they had told everyone not to leave, Helen's response was that her husband had died 3 years earlier in a car accident with a drunk driver. She said with a shaking voice, full of fear, that her daughter Linda was insisting on going out into the total darkness to be with them. "Please, you have to understand," Helen sobbed into the phone. "My husband died 3 years ago, but Linda keeps saying, 'Daddy's outside, Mommy, he wants to see me. I don't know what to do.'" From that terrifying call from Helen, calls began pouring into Brookton police. 329 calls, all reporting similar incidents with their young children, involving people who had been dead for years or strange people they didn't know. Despite the strangeness of this overwhelming number of reports, the real disaster happened the next day, August 12th. More than 400 calls from Millfield residents reported that over 200 children from the town had all disappeared during the night, and no one knew where they were. What was even stranger was that they disappeared from inside homes that their owners had locked tight and were sure about the locks. Everyone confirmed that there was no sign of anyone entering, and there were no strange sounds during the night. A very difficult day passed for the residents of Millfield. Then came August 13th. At 5:19 p.m., Brookton police received a call from an elderly man named William Barnes, reporting that he saw a large fire coming from the south through his window. According to him, the fire was so huge that it lit up the town, which had been covered in darkness for days. Minutes passed, and calls began to increase from people also reporting the same fire. Some even described it as fire coming down from the sky itself, from the black opening they had reported on the first day. But strangely, no one living near Millfield reported seeing anything like what they were witnessing. A few hours passed, and at 12 a.m., a call came in from a man named Charles Morgan, saying that the fire had grown much larger and reached a point where the entire town was lit up as if it were daylight. Suddenly, the line went dead after Charles's last words. He saw something coming from the south, but unfortunately he didn't have time to describe to the police what that thing was. "The fire is getting bigger," Charles shouted into the phone. "It's lighting up everything. Wait, I see something coming from the south. Something big is—" The line went dead. The state of horror and tension continued until the last call came in at 9:47 p.m. It was a terrifying call by all standards. Officer James Mitchell from Brookton Police answered the call this time. As soon as he picked up the phone, he heard a muffled, unclear voice. He began to introduce himself, saying he was from the Brookton Police Department and his name was James Mitchell, but no one responded. When he asked again, "Is anyone there?" he heard a woman's voice say, "Yes, yes, Mitchell." James immediately replied, "Who is this? Please tell me your name." She responded, "My name is Dorothy. Dorothy Adams." At that point, James thought that her son had died in the fire that people were reporting. While he was trying to calm her, she interrupted him and said, "My son died last year. I saw him yesterday. I warned him and told him to be careful of cars when he was riding his bike, but he wouldn't listen." "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and explain exactly what's happening," James said carefully. Dorothy responded frantically, "Don't you hear what I'm telling you? I'm telling you they came back. They all came back. All those who died and disappeared came back yesterday, and they're looking for us. My son spoke to me and cried at me, saying, 'Mommy, I'm fine. Where are you? I want to see you.'" James couldn't understand anything being said. Suddenly, she went quiet and didn't continue speaking. James, in complete shock, asked her, "Are you in a safe place?" She told him, "I'm hiding like everyone else. We're all hiding. We all saw them coming from the fields, but some people opened their doors for them. They opened them after seeing their missing loved ones. And—" James began to hear screams coming from far away. Dorothy's voice came through saying, "I don't know exactly what happened to them, but I got scared and locked myself in tighter, and when I looked out the window I saw their houses burning with them trapped inside. I'm hiding in a closet on the ground floor now." Suddenly, Dorothy went quiet, and James began to call out to her, asking, "Are you safe? Are you okay? If you can hear me, give me any sign." But unfortunately, Dorothy didn't respond. Suddenly, he heard the sound of glass breaking, and Dorothy's voice crying out, "Help me!" Something came into the house. James told her, "Stay as quiet as you can. Don't make any sound." Suddenly, he heard the voice of a child coming from far away, saying, "Mommy, I'm here." And after seconds, he heard footsteps coming from far away, and a child calling, "Mommy, are you hiding from me? Where are you?" and Dorothy's breathing got louder from fear. James tried to reassure her, saying, "Don't worry, he'll leave." But the sound of footsteps kept getting clearer and closer to the phone. Suddenly, laughter and a child saying, "Got you, Mommy." Dorothy began to scream, and there was loud noise on the phone line. Then the call ended. The final earthquake and complete disappearance. This terrifying call was the last one received from Millfield by Brookton police. After that, the police continued to try to reach anyone there, but in the early morning of August 17th, the state of Kansas detected a violent earthquake measuring 7.9 on the Richter scale that hit the area where the town was located. The U.S. Geological Survey stated that the earthquake's center was directly beneath Millfield. Of course, an earthquake of this size didn't just affect Millfield but all the neighboring towns, including Brookton. So, security forces from Brookton went out for the second time toward Millfield, but this time it wasn't like every other time. The road didn't end with them back in Brookton as it had before. This time, they actually reached Millfield, or the site of Millfield, and what they found there was a surprise by all standards. Police found Millfield had completely vanished. No buildings, residents, or traces remained. Only a glowing crack 900 by 450 meters wide was left. After 12 days of fruitless searching, they abandoned efforts. A second earthquake struck, and the crack also disappeared. Police agreed never to speak of it again. Did you enjoy this story? What scared you more, the black hole in the sky or the dead people coming back? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.